Hey, what's up everyone? Hope you're all doing really well. We finally have the first snowfall of 2017 in the Northeast. It's a little late, but better late than never, and the earth is still working, kind of. Straight to the video today. This week I want to talk about software developer salaries. It's a little taboo, at least in US culture. Not many people like talking about it. It's a personal thing for a lot of people, but it's still a very important thing, so might as well talk about it. So what we're gonna do in this video is I'm gonna break it up into two major parts. First half of the video, I just wanna talk about major points to consider for salary, compensation, all that stuff, right? No details yet. First half is just major points, important stuff. Second half of this video, I'm gonna walk everyone through my personal salary progression from end of college, like right around the end of 2009, up until early to mid 2017 at my most recent job. Not my current job, but my most recent job. And I'm gonna walk everyone through exactly my salary progression, right? It's really personal, but who cares? And I think at the very least, it's gonna help you. All right, so if everyone's ready, let's just get straight into the video and start with these important points about software salaries. So first major point, first thing that I want to tell everyone is that do not read all those salary averages, Quora, like people talking about all their salaries online. There's so many different websites documenting the average pay of junior developers, senior developers, San Francisco, New York. Those websites, they're all bullshit, okay? That is probably the last resort. You should not use those websites as resources to judge your compensation. So the only true in my opinion, but the real most helpful way to judge your personal compensation is to ask a friend in a similar context. What do I mean by context? But context is pretty much your background, right? You can't compare yourself with somebody that's totally different from you with a totally different circumstance, background, upbringing, or anything, right? So for me personally, I'm lucky enough to be pretty privileged. I got to go to a really good school. I didn't have to take out too many loans to go to that school, and that school enabled me to get access to a lot of good jobs, right? And that's for me personally. Like for you, that circumstance is different, so it might not be 100% accurate for you to compare your context with my context. But there are people out there that you can compare context with. You can find them and you can just ask them, how much do you make? Personal story is that when I first moved to New York, I didn't have too much awareness of the salaries in New York City for my level, all that stuff. The most useful thing I did was ask my friend that went to the same school as me, one of my good buddies that lives here, but I just asked him how much money he was making, what he made at his last job, how did he progress, and when he just told me his numbers, it made me just realize where I stood, right? So, and we have a very similar context. We grew up in the suburbs, we went to the same college, same program, very similar, right? So that was a good reference point. Again, don't read all that online survey, PESA, salary average. It's all bullshit, all right? It's just people at Google complaining about their absurdly high salaries. You cannot just go to the internet to find out this information. You have to ask a friend or find someone. Second point I want to talk about is that the conversation that will happen to judge your compensation is going to happen really fast, and it might throw you off guard. There's been many times in my history or my career where that conversation happens so fast and it throws you off guard, because imagine it, right? Usually that conversation with your boss or recruiting manager or hiring manager or whatever, you might have a 10-15 minute conversation, maybe a 5-minute conversation, but that one conversation is going to affect how much money hits your bank account for at least a year, right? Just think about that. Such a quick interaction will judge such a long part of your life. So that particular conversation regarding compensation is really crucial. You have to be ready for it and just be ready for it. The last point I want to talk about is going to be the culture of asking. All right, so for many of you out there, actually the Asian people out there watching, I'm Asian. I was born in the US actually, but my parents came from China a while ago. They swam across the ocean, did crazy stuff, and they were able to come here, luckily, and have me, and I was able, I guess, luck or not lucky, but to be born in the US. So The one thing that's very different is the Asian culture versus the more Western US European culture, right? And what Asian culture kind of lacks, it's not as aggressive and you don't ask for too much stuff, right? Asian people are a little more timid, reserved, shy, and that's rooted deep into thousands of years of culture, right? In history, maybe that's changing because things are more Western, capitalistic, globalistic, but for Asians, the general culture is you don't ask for too much, right? You give a little bit, you take whatever you're given and you just appreciate it very much, right? And that's kind of been the Asian culture for a long time. It's not really a big culture on asking and asking for a lot of stuff. Now, if you compare that with Western culture, white culture, whatever you want to call it, but here, it's pretty much, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it, right? I think people have taught you that, that little phrase or that little idiom before, but if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. Somebody else that's going to ask for it is going to get it, right? So when I was growing up a little bit, asking for stuff, asking for more, like asking for more food on my plate at lunch, that wasn't really a value that Asian parents teach us, right? The culture of asking. But when it comes to salary talk, you have to ask. If you don't ask, no one's gonna give it to you, right? Maybe in different countries, non-US countries, there's no negotiations, you just take whatever you're given. But here, if you don't ask for it, no one's gonna give you that extra $20,000 on your salary, right? No one's gonna give that to you. So here, the culture of asking, it's a US thing, you have to develop it. For all the Asian people watching, I had to learn it. It wasn't natural for me, it wasn't even natural for my parents. But if you're an Asian person or you're a timid or shy person, you have to ask. All right. That's enough of the important topics. Now to the nitty-gritty details. Remember those important points we just talked about, because I think those are actually more important than all of these details. These details are just gonna give you some real life data points. So for me, let me just paint my context again. Remember, don't compare context if it's drastically different, but pretty privileged upbringing. Went to Carnegie Mellon, pretty good school for engineering. Took out minimum loans, probably a little less than $20,000 of loans, so I wasn't crazy in debt after school, and I got a master's in electrical and computer engineering. At the end of the master's, I got 3 job offers. One job offer was in Boston for $72,000 a year. One job offer was in San Diego for $82,000 a year. And one job offer was in New York City for like $60,000. We're mainly gonna talk about base salary, but remember, salary is just one part of your compensation, right? You could have bonuses, benefits, retirement stuff, stock options, all that different stuff. It all counts towards your total compensation. Many people make a majority of their money not even in their salary. It's through bonuses or stocks and all that stuff. But for everyone watching, salary is the most relatable, right? So those 3 job offers, I took the one in San Diego, California. It was starting at $82,000 a year. This was 2009. I was 22, out of college. At that time, I was working at a pretty big company in 2009, 2010, 2011 in San Diego. So that $82,000, I got a little bit of an inflation bump every year, and there were some bonuses and some stock stuff. So overall, I probably took home around $100,000 pre-tax every year back then. But moving on, working 2 to 3 years there, and I got a title change, promotion, whatever. I was called a senior engineer at that company, and they bumped up my base salary to 105. Everything else stays about the same, and I think my total take-home pre-tax was about maybe 130, 135 around then, and this is still San Diego around 2013, 2014. So that salary is actually very, very good, very comfortable for San Diego because the cost of living isn't too crazy. It's not a major tech hub, and that employer was one of like the top employers of that area. So I was really lucky. But in 2014, I moved across the country from San Diego back to the East Coast, where I moved to New York City because I wanted to try some startup stuff, right? I wanted to dip my toes into what that startup thing all meant. But when I went there, I took a really, really big pay cut to go to a New York City startup job, and I took a pay cut all the way down to $95,000 a year. And I couldn't even negotiate that very much because I didn't have any leverage at all, and I just didn't know what I was doing. But I just took a huge pay cut just to come here, just to come to New York City and try to work at a startup. So I'm not really complaining, right? $95,000 a year, that's not poverty. That's still really good. But during that time, I was moving to New York and it was a little bit of an unknown for me. I didn't know where I stacked amongst a lot of other people. And believe it or not, that's when I was most like kind of stressed out about compensation and stuff. But at that point, that's when I started to ask my friends, my peers, people I went to school with, what are they at? And a lot of them were making a lot more money than me. Some of them were making a little more money than me, but everybody was different, right? But that was the time, right when I moved to the city where there was a lot of unknowns. It was less established, this whole random startup thing in New York City, but I didn't know where I stood. But after talking with a lot of friends, I got a better picture of that. So $95,000 in New York City, it's not poverty, but it's well below my level. That's what I decided. So at that startup job, I worked 1 year there, and during my 1 year review, they offered to bump me up to $115. $20,000 is not so bad. I asked for $145, and eventually we got down to $135. So this was like a year in, so maybe this is 2015, and now I'm making $135 base in New York City. So it's roughly equivalent to my pre-tax money that I was making in San Diego. All right, next job after that, I believe, after one startup, I actually tried to go to another startup, which was a whole different industry, a whole different thing, but they were actually much, much smaller. And during that time, I had a better sense of equity compensation. I had a more sense of what the startup environment really meant. But to go work at that second startup, I took a pay cut again. So yeah, that sucks, but it's always up and down, right? So I was at 135, but then I took a pay cut down to 105 base, but I got a lot of equity. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. Like, you value equity very differently. You value equity more if you believe in the company. The second startup, I had a little more like, you know, I felt it a lot better. I still have stock in that company. I love those guys, but for them, I took another pay cut down to 105, but I took a lot more stock options, which may or may not mean anything. So that pay cut, actually, I took it with a little more forethought, but that startup company I joined was very early and they just couldn't afford paying me like $135,000 a year. So what I got in my offer was that the moment that startup company would raise another round of funding and get more capital and pay people a lot more money, I got it written in my offer that I would get bumped up back to my market rates because 105 was low. So we worked for a while. We thought the fundraise was gonna happen in 6 months. So I thought I would get bumped up really fast, but 6 months turned into 1 year. 1 year turned into even longer. And I think maybe about, I don't know, like a year and change in, the company finally was able to raise the money and pay people their market rates, right? So I was at 105. We decided there's another round of negotiation that happened. They offered 140. I asked for 170, and then we came down to 155 salary. So actually, that's the end of my journey. You know, it's a little bit of an up and down. So the 155 was the amount I was making early 2017 at my most recent job. I'm not gonna share what I make right now because I care about the employer. I don't want anything bad to happen if I share salary information, but my most recent job, which was just this year because I switched jobs this year, but I was at $155,000 base salary at that most recent job. This year I turned 30, so you know my age, you know my background, that's my context, right? So just a little bit of a story, a timeline of data points for you. I think hopefully this is helpful coming from me, even though the context is different, but don't read any of that online stuff, all right? If you just read online stuff, you're gonna see these insane salary ranges, people in San Francisco making absurd amounts of money. I just heard recently that people out of school, out of some of the top tech schools, they're getting offers like 120 plus straight out of school. These are like 21-year-olds. So the range is really high sometimes now, but remember, always context, always background, or else the comparison doesn't make any sense. All right, guys, that's the end of the video. Hopefully the story was helpful, but I think the most significant, most important part to remember of this video is everything we talked about in the first half, all right? The first half. My numbers really don't mean anything. They could mean nothing to you. It's just as a reference, but the most important points of this video is all the stuff we talked about in the first half. So if you're gonna rewatch it, just rewatch the first half of it, and hopefully that content is helpful. So like the video, give me a comment, ask me any questions, send me an email, share the video, all that stuff. Hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of your day.